Not every apocalypse ends with a revelation. When Mara unlocked the front door of her mother's house, she expected dust. She expected the stale exhale of a place shut too long, the dry sweetness of old wood and paper, the faint sourness of curtains that hadn't been drawn back in months. Instead, the air that met her was soft. It carried a trace of her mother's perfume, something powdery and floral, caught in the fibers of the hallway carpet. Beneath it lingered lemon polish and the faint metallic tang of radiator heat. The house didn't smell abandoned, it smelled preserved. The hinges opened without complaint. Light slipped in around Mara's shoulders and caught on thin lines strung through the entryway. At first, she thought they were cobwebs. Then she saw the paper. Small tags, cream-colored, each one tied with white thread, knotted carefully. The ends trimmed close. They looped from doorknobs, drawer pulls, banister rails, hung from light fixtures so lightly they stirred in the air of her entrance. The threads crossed and recrossed in places, faint constellations against the ceiling. Each tag bore her mother's handwriting, slanted, deliberate, pressed lightly harder on the downstrokes. I was proud of you. Kitchen. I shouldn't have yelled. Hallway. You were so small. Stairs. The words did not shout. They waited. Mara stepped fully inside. The door closed behind her with a padded click. The sound softened by thick weather stripping her mother had installed years ago to keep drafts out. The quiet that followed felt upholstered. Lily pressed close against her hip, fingers hooking into the seams of Mara's coat. She peered around the wool, eyes tracking the threads that shimmered faintly in the afternoon light. Why are there so many strings? Lily asked. Her voice seemed to travel only a short distance before settling. Mara swallowed. The house felt warmer than the October air outside, the heat low but steady, as if it had been expecting them. Grandma liked to organize, she said. It wasn't untrue. Her mother had organized everything. Bills stacked by due date, recipes laminated and slid into plastic sleeves, towels folded with their edges aligned. Even the pantry labels faced outward, printed in neat block letters. Emotions, apparently, had been cataloged too. Mara reached out and brushed one of the tags aside to clear a path through the living room. The paper grazed her knuckles, smooth, slightly thicker than standard stock. The thread left a faint indentation across her skin before lifting away. They had not been estranged, not exactly, but their conversations had always carried edges. Words chosen carefully, apologies implied rather than spoken, affection delivered through logistics, casseroles, reminder calls, forwarded articles. There had been too many unfinished arguments, folded small and tucked away. Too many silences stretched thin between them like twine pulled taut. Mara stepped farther in. The floorboards held her weight without complaint. The hallway seemed narrower than she remembered. Not smaller, exactly, just closer. The walls held the afternoon light in a way that made the space feel contained rather than open. She had come to sell the house. That was the plan. She would sort the paperwork, clear the rooms, remove the threads, pack the remnants into boxes that smelled like cardboard and closure. She had not expected the house to feel so intact. Not empty, not grieving, intact. Behind her, Lily reached up and brushed a tag with one curious fingertip. It spun lightly on its thread, the motion small and deliberate. The words turned toward them. I was proud of you. Kitchen. The paper settled. The air did not move. The first time she touched one of the labels, she did not mean to. It hung from the lower kitchen cabinet, just beneath the counter where she used to sit, swinging her legs, heels thudding softly against the wood while her mother cooked. The thread had been looped neatly around the brass handles. The tag rested against the painted surface as if it belonged there. I was proud of you, kitchen. Mara reached for the cabinet to steady herself as she set her purse down. Her knuckles brushed the paper. The sensation was immediate and disorienting. It began low in her chest, not pain exactly, but pressure. A fullness that rose too quickly, as if she inhaled something thick and warm. Her throat tightened, her eyes stung. For a split second, she felt 8 years old again, standing at the kitchen table with a construction paper diorama of the solar system, glue still tacky on her fingers. She could see it with unsettling clarity, the wobble of the styrofoam planets, the way her mother had bent slightly to look closer, not distracted, not correcting, just looking. Mara had forgotten that look, or perhaps she had folded it away. The warmth swelled again, fierce and sudden, until her knees felt unreliable. She caught the edge of the counter, breath catching high in her lungs. It was not memory alone. It was the physical sensation of being witnessed kindly, of being enough. It lasted only seconds, then it thinned, receding like heat after stepping away from an oven. The kitchen returned to itself, lemon polish, the faint tick of the refrigerator motor, Lily humming somewhere down the hall. Mara drew her hand back slowly. The tag swung once, lightly. She pressed her palm flat against the cabinet door as if testing for fever. Nothing. Only wood. Cool now. But something inside her had shifted. A seam loosened. A long-held interpretation of her childhood, sharp-edged, defensive, softened at the corners. She had remembered the criticism, the raised voice, the tight jaw. She had not remembered this. Behind her, Lily padded into the doorway, soft feet whispering over linoleum. "Mom?" Mara cleared her throat. It felt raw, as if she had swallowed something larger than she just meant to. "Just a memory," she said, though it didn't feel small enough to be called that. She turned back to the tag. The handwriting seemed steadier than she remembered her mother's being in later years. Deliberate, careful, pressed deep enough into the paper to leave faint grooves. "I was proud of you." Not "I am," was. The past tense sat heavily. Mara touched the thread again, more cautiously this time. The warmth did not return in the same rush, but something steadier unfolded instead. A low, humming reassurance, the kind that settles in the sternum and makes the room feel closer without moving at all. She exhaled slowly. The kitchen seemed quieter now, contained. For the first time since the funeral, she felt something other than anger or exhaustion. She felt held. Mara lay down in her old room across the hall. The ceiling felt lower than she remembered. Not visibly so, but the darkness seemed closer, the corners rounding inward as her eyes adjusted. She woke once to the sound of Lily shifting. The floorboards gave a small, familiar sigh beneath her steps as she crossed the hallway. The air, that was the word, that came to her uninvited. Lily chose the small bedroom at the center of the hall without hesitation. It had always been the warmest room, the one furthest from exterior walls. Its single window faced the side yard, but was set high enough that you couldn't see the street without standing on tiptoe. Mara smoothed the sheets with the flat of her hands. They smelled faintly of detergent and cedar from the dresser drawers. The mattress dipped in the middle in a familiar way, the kind that remembers bodies. "Are we safe here?" Lily asked as she slid beneath the blanket. The question was casual, sleep-heavy, the kind children ask without drama. Mara paused only a second. Yes, and she meant it. She left the bedroom door open, just in case. The hallway light remained on, low and amber. It pulled softly against the baseboards, casting the threads in faint shadow against the walls. They swayed almost imperceptibly whenever she passed, like breath made visible. It was warmer outside Lily's room than inside of it, as if the corridor held heat more tightly. She stood in the hallway and watched her daughter sleep. Lily's hand drifted toward the edge of the mattress, fingers splayed slightly, as if reaching. Mara stepped closer, tucked the blanket around her shoulders. The act sent a quiet bloom of satisfaction through her chest, the steadying relief of proximity. Then she returned to her own room. She did not close the door. She woke again sometime after midnight. The house had settled further into itself. Pipes no longer clicked. The refrigerator was still. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed absorbed before it reached the windows. The silence was not absence. It was containment. She stepped into the hallway barefoot. The wood felt warmer beneath her feet than it would have at that hour. That was when she noticed the new label. It hung from the stair banister, tied carefully at eye level. She was certain it had not been there earlier. The thread was pulled snug around the carved wood, the knot precise. "I was afraid when you stopped needing me." The words did not accuse, they confessed. Mara stood very still. The hallway light brushed the paper in gold, illuminating the faint indentation of pen strokes pressed firmly into fiber. She could see her mother's hands in it, the slight tremor near the tail of the G, the deeper groove where the pen had lingered too long. Her throat tightened. She remembered packing her car for college, the trunk stuffed with plastic bins, her mother standing on the porch, arms crossed not from anger, but from restraint. "Call when you get there," her mother had said. The fight had come later, over something small, a missed visit, a tone of voice. Mara had always remembered the sharpness, not this. She reached up and touched the tag. The response was immediate, but different from the warmth in the kitchen. This was colder, denser. It spread from her sternum downward, settling low in her abdomen like a stone dropped into deep water. It was not anger, not control, fear. Not the loud kind that panics, the quiet kind that waits. The fear of irrelevance, of being replaced by distance, of loving someone who can live without you. It pressed against her ribs with a steady insistence. Mara's fingers tightened reflexively on the paper, crumbling it slightly before she forced herself to loosen her grip. Her breath hitched. The house did not creak, did not shift. It simply remained, containing the feeling until it did not spill over. She leaned her forehead briefly against the banister, the wood cool against her skin. "I didn't know," she whispered. Whether she meant it to her mother or to herself, she could not tell. The tears came slowly at first, then in a rush that felt almost cleansing. They slid warm along her cheeks, fell to the polished floor without sound. She had not cried at the funeral. There had been paperwork to handle, guests to greet, arrangements to make. Here in the center of the hallway, beneath a label that named something she had misunderstood for years, grief found its shape. Not rage, not resentment. Just fear answered too late. When the tears subsided, the house felt warmer. Not dramatically, just enough that the air no longer prickled against her damp skin. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand and looked down the corridor towards Lily's room. The open door glowed softly in the amber light. For a fleeting second, she imagined that doorway closed. Lily grown, the house emptied. The image hollowed her. She stepped toward the bedroom immediately, drawn by a pull that felt practical, protective. She stood in the doorway longer this time, listening, counting breaths. The hallway behind her seemed narrower than before, the walls closer at her shoulders. The light pulled tightly around her feet. It felt steadier here, centered. She did not think, "I will stay." She thought, "Not yet." Morning would come. There would be time to decide. But as she returned to her own room, she closed her door only halfway. And when she lay down again, the quiet of the house folded carefully around her. Selling the house began to feel premature. The word itself, selling, sounded abrupt now, transactional, like severing something before it had been fully examined. There were things here she hadn't understood. Corners she had moved through too quickly in her youth. Tones she had mistaken for judgment. Silences she had interpreted as indifference. The labels shifted that. They rearranged the past gently, without argument. She told herself that she would stay until the paperwork was sorted, until the estate was clean, until Lily adjusted to the new rhythm of things. Her husband, Daniel, called the third evening. His voice arrived through the speaker thin and practical, threaded with highway noise. "How's it going?" he asked. "Fine," Mara said, glancing down the hallway where Lily sat cross-legged, drawing floor plans on the back of an old grocery list. "It's peaceful." There was a pause on his end, a soft exhale she could not read. "Don't stay too long," he said lightly. "You know how that place gets." She knew what he meant. Too quiet, too heavy, too much history. She found herself bristling. Not at him exactly, but at the imprecision of his tone. "It's not like that," she said. The kitchen felt warmer tonight. The late sunlight slanted across the table, catching in the threads above them. They trembled slightly in the air from the open window, though no wind seemed to pass through. Daniel asked about the realtor. "I'll call her tomorrow," Mara said. She did not. The house felt warmer when she and Lily ate together at the kitchen table. The warmth was not dramatic, just a soft accumulation just beneath the ribs, like tea settling into the stomach. The space seemed to gather around them, light compressing gently against the walls. Lily talked more here, about a book she'd started, about a neighbor's dog she'd watched through the fence. Her voice carried differently indoors. It didn't scatter. Cooler when Lily played alone in the yard. Not cold, just thinner. The warmth seemed to drain toward the center of the house when Lily stepped beyond the threshold. Mara would stand at the sink, watching through the high-set window as Lily walked the perimeter of the grass, tracing lines in the dirt with a stick. The yard suddenly felt larger than she remembered, the fence lower, the sky wider. Exposure, she thought. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the back door. "Just until dinner," she called. Lily turned obediently. "Just because it's getting chilly." It was late summer. The air still held the day's heat. The grass was warm beneath bare feet. But when Lily crossed back into the kitchen, Mara felt her shoulders lower almost involuntarily. The air thickened slightly again, as if settling into its preferred arrangement. Daniel came up the following weekend. He stepped into the entryway and immediately reached up to brush aside a strand of thread that grazed his cheeks. "What is all this?" he asked, half laughing. "Mom's system," Mara said. He moved through the house differently than she did. Wider, less aware of the threads, brushing past them without slowing. The hallway seemed to resist him slightly, forcing his shoulders inward. "It feels smaller," he said at one point, glancing toward the ceiling. "It's always been this size," Mara replied. She opened a window in the living room. The breeze that entered felt abrupt, disruptive. It stirred the threads too sharply. One of the labels knocked softly against the wall. Mara crossed the room and closed it again. "Let's keep it comfortable," she said. That night, Daniel suggested they start clearing closets. "Rip it off like a bandage," he said gently. "It'll be easier." Mara stood in the hallway beneath the amber light. The house felt steady, centered. She imagined empty rooms, walls stripped of tags, the threads cut. The image made her chest constrict. "We don't have to rush," she said. "Lily needs time." Daniel studied her for a moment. "And you?" he asked. Mara didn't answer. Later in the bedroom, he reached for her in the dark. She lay still for a moment longer than usual. The house seemed to hold its breath. She turned toward him eventually, but the connection felt thinner than it once had, diffuse. Her attention kept drifting toward the hallway light, slipping beneath the door. In the morning, Daniel stood at the back door, keys in hand. "You sure you're okay here?" he asked. Mara glanced down the corridor. Lily sat at the table, had bent close to a new drawing. The threads above her moved almost imperceptibly in the circulating air. "Yes," she said. And she meant something more than fine. Daniel nodded slowly. "Call me," he said. "I will." She did not watch him drive away. Instead, she closed the back door firmly and turned the lock with a soft, decisive click. The house exhaled, not audibly, but perceptibly, like a room that has just been restored to order. Mara stood there a moment longer, palm resting flat against the wood. Then she returned to the kitchen table. The warmth gathered again. Lily looked up. "Is Daddy staying?" she asked. "Not today," Mara said. Lily nodded once, as if the answer aligned with something already understood. Outside, the yard seemed larger than ever. Inside, the rooms felt closer. Homeschooling started as a conversation. They were in the kitchen when Mara mentioned it, hands resting lightly on the back of Lily's chair. "The school district isn't what it used to be," she said. "It's louder, less focused." Daniel leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely. The afternoon light caught in the threads above them, casting faint lines across his shoulders. "Loud isn't always bad," he said. "Kids need room." The word hung there. Room. Mara glanced around the kitchen. The table sat centered beneath the light fixture. Chairs angled inward. The walls held the late sun in a way that made the space feel gathered. "She has room," Mara said evenly. "Just not chaos." Lily looked up from her notebook, pencil paused midline. "I like it here," she offered quietly. Daniel smiled at her, but something in his jaw tightened. The adjustments to the furniture had been incremental. The couch now rested flush against the wall, its back no longer floating in the center of the room. The coffee table had shifted closer, narrowing the walkway between sofa and bookshelf. The dining chairs angled slightly inward, knees nearly touching beneath the table. Daniel noticed first with his body. He brushed his hip against the edge of the counter, turned sideways in the hallway to pass Mara. "Did this place shrink?" he asked lightly one evening, rubbing his shoulder where it had grazed a door frame. "It's the same," Mara said. "We're just using it better." He opened a window in the living room. The air that rushed in felt abrupt, too wide, too uncontained. The curtains lifted sharply, disturbing the threads strung across the doorway. Mara crossed the room and eased it shut. "It's cooler outside," she said. "It's summer," he replied gently. The latch clicked into place. The house settled again, the air smoothing. Daniel stood very still for a moment, as if listening for something. "I can't breathe in here the way I used to," he said, not accusing, just observant. Mara felt the words land somewhere behind her ribs. "It's comfortable," she answered. "For you," he said. Lily's weekend bag sat packed by the door one Friday afternoon. Daniel stood waiting, keys in hand. "You ready, kiddo?" he asked. Lily hesitated, just a fraction. Her eyes flicked down the hallway toward the dining table, where her sketches lay spread in careful stacks. "Can I stay this weekend?" she asked softly. Daniel's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. "It's our weekend," he said. "She's in the middle of something," Mara offered. "We've been working through a project." "It's 2 days," Daniel replied. Lily's fingers tightened in the fabric of Mara's sleeve. Mara felt the small instinctive pressure. Her shoulders dropped, her breath steadied. "She sleeps better here," Mara said. Daniel's eyes moved between them. "You know," he said slowly, "it feels like there's less room for me every time I come back." The hallway light cast thin shadows across his face, the threads trembling faintly in the air between them. "There's room for what matters," Mara replied. The sentence left her mouth before she had fully shaped it. Daniel nodded once. "I see," he said. He did not argue. He did not slam the door. He simply stepped back across the threshold. When Mara closed it behind him, the sound was soft and final. The lock turned with a small, precise click. The house seemed to redistribute itself in the silence that followed, the quiet thickening, drawing inward. Lily exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders. "It's better when it's just us," she said almost to herself. Mara did not correct her. She walked back toward the dining table, where the chairs sat close enough that their edges nearly touched. The hallway brushed her shoulder as she passed. She did not turn sideways. One afternoon, Lily stood at the sink watching the park across the street. The late light stretched long over the grass, flattening the field into gold and shadow. A cluster of children chased a soccer ball in uneven bursts, their shouts lifting and dissolving in the open air. I think I'd like to try that, Lily said. She did not turn around when she spoke. Her fingertips rested lightly on the windowsill, tracing the faint groove worn into the paint. Mara was at the dining table, sorting through estate documents she had already sorted twice. Try what? She asked, though she knew. Soccer. They're starting sign-ups. A small pulse moved through Mara's chest. Not panic, not quite, but a tightening. The kind that comes when something expands too quickly in the imagination. She pictured Lily on that field, running beyond the fence line, calling to other children, turning towards voices that were not hers. The sky in her mind felt too large. It's loud over there, Mara said carefully, and the older kids can be rough. Lily shrugged. I'd just try it. The word try lingered in the air like an open door. Mara rose from the table and stepped into the hallway. The boards gave a soft, familiar creak beneath her weight. The corridor felt narrower in the afternoon heat. The air slightly thickened from the closed windows. She stood beneath the front door frame without knowing why. That was when she noticed the label. It hung from the brass knob, tied neatly with white thread pulled snug against the metal. The paper lay flat against the wood as if it had always been there. Chill drift. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her mother's slanted script, the same pressure at the downstroke. Mara stared at it. She could not remember seeing it before. The front door had been opened and closed a dozen times that week. She would have noticed. Wouldn't she? The word drift settled heavily in her stomach. She remembered being 16, standing in the same doorway with her car keys, her mother's voice clipped and careful. You'll forget where you came from. Mara had rolled her eyes then. Now the memory felt different. Drift wasn't rebellion. Drift was distance. Distance was quiet, permanent. She reached up and touched the tag. The sensation was settled this time. Not a rush, not warmth, a slow settling, a gravity. Her breath shortened slightly, the way it did when Lily walked too far ahead in a crowded store, the way it had when Daniel had stood at the threshold and not come inside. The fear was not dramatic, it was steady. She let the paper fall back against the door. Outside, a shout rose from the field. The ball struck the metal fence with a hollow clang. The sound echoed in the hallway longer than it should have. That night, the house felt particularly still. The air did not shift. The threads hung straight, undisturbed. Even the refrigerator motor seemed to hum at a lower pitch. Mara lay awake, listening to Lily breathe in the next room. She imagined the soccer field again, the wide openness of it, the way bodies scattered across it in unpredictable arcs. In the house, everything moved in known paths. Footsteps followed familiar lines. Doors opened inward. Rooms gathered toward the center. Cohesion creates security. The phrase returned unbidden. In the morning, sunlight pressed softly against the curtains, filtered and warm. The hallway felt close but not constricting, more like an embrace that had tightened overnight. Lily sat at the dining table, sketchbook open. I thought about it, Mara said, keeping her voice light. Soccer might be a little overwhelming right now. Let's wait another year. Lily's pencil paused. She did not argue. She nodded once. Okay. The answer came too easily. For a fleeting second, something inside Mara flickered. A small question about how quickly compliance can become habit. Then Lily leaned forward again, drawing carefully measured lines that folded toward a central square. The house felt settled, not triumphant, not relieved, settled. The hallway air warmed by a degree so slight it could have been imagination. Outside, the park emptied slowly as evening fell. Inside, the dining chairs sat close enough that their legs touched. Mara never raised her voice. The house did not require it. Her tone remained level, almost tender, even when she redirected. "We just don't need all that outside noise," she would say, wiping the counter in slow, circular motions, the cloth dragging faintly against varnished wood. Noise meant unpredictability, unfiltered opinions, sharp corners in conversation. Inside, the air moved differently. Sound softened before it reached the walls. "You and I understand each other." She said that often, brushing Lily's hair behind her ear, fingers lingering at the nape of her neck where the skin was warmest. Understanding felt like a closed loop, a system without interruption. Home is where we're strongest. The word strongest replaced safest over time. It sounded less fearful, more intentional. Lily repeated it once, testing the weight of it. "Strongest," she said, rolling the syllables slowly. The hallway light caught in her eyes, making them seem darker. Sometimes Mara found herself standing in Lily's doorway long after she meant to leave. The room had been rearranged again, subtly, precisely. The bed centered more deliberately now, the dresser angled so that no corner protruded too far into the space, the bookshelf drawn closer to the desk, compressing the walkway to a narrow path that encouraged straight lines. The curtains filtered the moonlight into a dull glow, no sharp beams, just a low, even wash across the floorboards. Lily slept on her side, one hand tucked beneath her cheek. Her breathing was steady, rhythmic, a soft pull and release that seemed to set the pace for the rest of the house. Mara would stand there and match it. Inhale, exhale. The hallway behind her felt cooler than the bedroom. The air inside Lily's room held warmth more persistently, as if the walls had learned to store it. Her mother had done this too. Mara remembered waking once as a child and finding her mother in the doorway, not moving, just watching. At the time, it had felt invasive, evaluative. Now she understood the impulse differently. She wasn't watching to correct, she was watching to protect. There was a difference. She stepped one foot inside the room, careful not to disturb the light on the floor. The floorboards didn't creak beneath her weight anymore. She had learned where to place her feet. Lily shifted slightly in her sleep. Mara's breath caught. For a moment, she imagined the doorway empty, the bed vacant, the space wide and echoing. The image was so abrupt, it felt like a draft against her skin. She moved closer, instinctively. The air warmed again. Her hand hovered inches above Lily's shoulder, not quite touching. The proximity was enough. Sometimes she whispered, very softly, as if sealing something, "I'm right here." Lily did not wake, but her breathing deepened, almost imperceptibly. The house seemed to respond to that rhythm. The faint ticking of pipes slowed. The refrigerator's hum faded into the background. Even the threads in the hallway hung motionless, as though attentive. Mara would stand until her calves ached, until the warmth in the room felt evenly distributed, until the thought of absence retreated. When she finally stepped back into the hallway, the air felt thinner by comparison. She would close Lily's door halfway, not shut, never shut, just enough to frame the glow. She told herself she was allowing independence. She told herself she was not like her mother. Her mother had hovered out of fear. Mara hovered out of love. The distinction comforted her. And each night, the night she spent in the doorway, lengthened by a few quiet seconds. The first time Lily tied a label herself, she did it without asking. Mara noticed it at dusk, when the light inside the house turned the color of diluted honey, and the hallway shadows thickened along the baseboards. It hung from the pull chain of Lily's bedside lamp, a small rectangle of cream paper rotating lazily in the rising heat from the bulb. Stay. The letters were larger than Mara's mother's had been, rounder, pressed hard enough that paper had faintly buckled beneath the ink. The thread was tied neatly, twice around the chain, the knot cinched with deliberate care. Mara stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. The room felt warm, warmer than the hallway. The air carried the faint scent of pencil shavings and laundry detergent, the clean mineral smell of paper. "When did you make this?" she asked lightly. Lily sat cross-legged on the rug, lining up her colored pencils in tight parallel rows. The spacing between them was exact. "Today," she said. Mara reached up and brushed the tag with her fingertip. The paper turned slowly, catching the lamplight and casting a thin, swinging shadow across the ceiling. "That's sweet," she said. Lily shrugged without looking up. "It makes me feel better." "Better how?" Lily paused, considering. "Like it won't go anywhere." The answer was simple, untroubled. Mara felt something soften inside her chest, a low, steady bloom of recognition. She remembered tying knots in her own hair as a child when she was anxious, twisting fabric around her wrist, creating little anchors. "It's good to feel steady," Mara said. Lily nodded once. The lamp hummed faintly, a soft electrical vibration beneath the warmth of the bulb. Mara stood there longer than she meant to. The room seemed arranged around that single word now. The bed, the desk, the bookshelf, all orbiting quietly beneath the hanging tag. Stay. The hallway outside felt different when she stepped back into it. Not smaller, just closer. The air held a density she had come to associate with calm. Sound did not travel as far. The house seemed to absorb movement before it could echo. Over the next few days, Lily added more. Close. Here. Safe. Each tag was placed with intention. At the window latch, along the closet handle, near the headboard. The threads caught faintly in Mara's peripheral vision as she passed, thin white lines mapping invisible boundaries through the air. Daniel saw them during one of his brief visits. "What's with the signs?" he asked, half smiling. "It's just a phase," Mara said. He reached up and untied one absent-mindedly from the closet knob. The shift in the room was subtle but immediate, not visible, not audible, but felt. The air seemed to thin for a split second. Lily's head snapped up from her desk. Don't, she said sharply. The word hung between them. Daniel froze, the paper dangling loosely from his hand. Mara crossed the room and retied the thread carefully, smoothing it flat against the wood. It helps her focus, she said, not looking at him. Daniel studied the room as if recalibrating its dimensions. It feels like the walls are closer every time I come back, he murmured. They're not, Mara replied. But when he stepped into the hallway, he turned sideways slightly to pass. After he left that evening, Lily stood beneath the lamp and watched the tag spin slowly in the quiet. Mara stood behind her, one hand resting lightly on her daughter's shoulder. The word cast a small shadow across the ceiling. Stay. The hallway felt settled, not triumphant, not celebratory, settled. Like a room after furniture had been pushed flush against the walls, and the last open space had been accounted for. Mara did not question the comfort of it. She told herself it was different. Her mother had catalogued regret. Lily was creating assurance. There was a difference. And if the space between rooms felt narrower now, it was only because they had finally learned how to use it well. Daniel became a story told in bright fragments. Photographs sent late at night. 3 small children suspended mid-motion, knees grass-stained, mouths open in laughter wide enough to show molars, toys flung across a yard without pattern, a sprinkler arching water over bodies that did not stay still long enough to dry. The images felt noisy, even without sound. The ceilings in his new house seemed high in every frame. Air pulled above them. Open doorways cut long, uninterrupted lines into other rooms. Nothing appeared to gather or hold. Everything looked as though it could spill at any moment. Mara would scroll briefly, then place her phone face down on the kitchen table. The house around her remained steady. The late light thickened in the hallway, catching faintly on the threads still tied along beams and door frames. The air did not echo. It settled. Lily visited once, out of obligation more than desire. She returned with a crease between her brows and a quietness that felt heavier than before. They don't really close doors, she said. Mara waited for elaboration. They just leave them open, all the way. The sentence lingered. All the way. Mara imagined it. Rooms bleeding into rooms without resistance. That must feel different, she offered. Lily nodded. It's like everything's drifting. The word struck something deep and familiar. Drifting was what they had learned to prevent. By the time Lily was a teenager, she sketched constantly. Not casually, precisely. Graph paper aligned in stacks, corners squared with the table's edges, mechanical pencils laid parallel, each sharpened to identical length, the eraser shavings collected deliberately in a small white mound rather than scattered. Floor plans, room arrangements, cross-sections. She began with interiors first, always the center of the house before the facade. Her designs folded inward with increasing consistency, few exterior doors, central family rooms. Windows angled towards interior courtyards where light could enter without inviting sightlines outward. The first time Mara noticed the proportions repeating, she felt something unfamiliar slide through her. Not fear, but recognition without origin. Lily would draw a rectangle for a room, pause, measure, adjust, narrow slightly. Extend the adjoining corridor just enough to slow movement. When Mara asked where she learned the ratios, Lily shrugged. They just felt right. Mara, curious, once looked up common architectural principles online. The golden ratio, harmonious proportions, the mathematics of balance. The measurements in Lily's sketches were close, uncannily close, within fractions. No one had taught her that. Lily erased a hallway one afternoon, frowning. It's too wide, she murmured. People would rush through. She narrowed it with 2 deliberate strokes. When spaces are too open, she said without looking up, people disconnect. Disconnect. The word seemed to land against the walls and remain there. Mara became aware of the kitchen around them, how the dining table nearly met the wall, how the chairs angled inward so knees brushed underneath. The passage between the counter and chair required a subtle turn at the shoulders now, not cramped, precise. Guests had begun to notice it without naming it. The rare visitors who stepped inside instinctively lowered their voices after the first few sentences. Laughter softened quickly. Conversations compressed into closer circles. Once a neighbor paused mid-story and glanced toward the hallway. I don't know why I'm whispering, she said lightly. Mara smiled. It's peaceful here. The neighbor nodded, voice still subdued. Yes, peaceful. The old kitchen label brushed Mara's sleeve as she passed. I was proud of you. The paper grazed her skin like a pulse. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. The feeling was already present, steady beneath her ribs. Outside, a car passed too quickly, bass vibrating briefly against the window glass before dissolving. The sound seemed to flatten at the threshold, as if pressed thin against the walls. Daniel sent another photo that evening. The 3 children piled across his lap on a sprawling sectional couch. A vaulted ceiling stretched above them, beams exposed. In the background, a sliding glass door stood wide open to the yard. The openness in the image felt excessive. Air without boundary. Lily leaned over Mara's shoulder, studying it. They look like they're falling, she said quietly. They're just playing, Mara replied. But even as she said it, she noticed how far apart the furniture sat in the photograph, how the eye could travel in a straight line from one wall to another without interruption. She turned the phone face down. Lily's newest sketch showed a courtyard entirely encased by walls, the sky framed in a near perfect square. There's no backyard? Mara asked. There doesn't need to be, Lily answered. There's room inside. Room inside. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background. The threads above the doorway hung nearly motionless. Mara glanced down the corridor. The distance to the front door felt shorter than it once had. Not smaller, just nearer. She told herself it was familiarity, adaptation, growth. Outside, the sky widened toward dusk. Inside, the walls held their proportions exactly. Years later, Lily stood at the front of a conference room, washed in indirect light. The ceiling panels above were high and evenly spaced, designed for openness. The glass walls at the back of the room revealed a city stretched wide in every direction, streets cutting long, uninterrupted lines between buildings. Mara disliked the room immediately. There was too much visible sky. Lily's presentation glowed across the screen behind her, a cluster of low-profile homes arranged in deliberate curvature, each structure angled subtly inward. The overhead rendering resembled something organic when viewed from above, not symmetrical, but gathered. The audience leaned forward. Architects, developers, a handful of journalists. One of them raised a hand. "Some critics say your corridors are a bit narrow for modern flow," he said, tone light but curious. "Any thoughts?" The word flow seemed to echo faintly in the high-ceilinged space. Lily stilled. Her hands, which had been resting lightly on the podium, flattened against its surface. The grain of the wood pressed into her palms. For a brief second, she imagined widening the hallways, letting light travel uninterrupted from front door to back window. Doors opening outward instead of inward, air moving without redirection. The image felt bright, almost startling. Something inside her chest loosened, a subtle upward lift as if pressure had shifted. She inhaled. The conference room felt vast in that moment, the edges too far apart. She pictured children running unimpeded from one room to the next, voices carrying without softening, corners without shelter. The looseness tightened again. Her shoulders drew back. "Flow is overrated," she said calmly. "Stability lasts." The room nodded. A murmur of approval moved through the audience. Not loud, but cohesive, contained. "Your proportions are remarkable," another architect added. "There's an intuitive harmony to your layouts. They feel balanced." Balanced. Mara felt the words settle into her like warmth. She sat in the second row, hands folded neatly in her lap. The conference chair felt too wide beneath her, its armrests spaced farther apart than she preferred. She found herself leaning slightly inward, closing the distance unconsciously. On the screen behind Lily, a slide displayed measurements, ratios that hovered near familiar mathematical harmonies, the golden rectangle, symmetry softened by fractional adjustment. The audience admired the precision. Lily had never studied those principles formally. She had arrived at them by instinct. "They just felt right," she had said once, years ago at the dining table. Now the room affirmed it. Intuitive harmony. The phrase moved through Mara with a brief, unexpected chill. Harmony implied inevitability. She felt for the smallest instant the memory of Daniel's voice in the hallway. "It feels like there's less room for me every time I come back." The memory arrived uninvited, clearer than it had been in years. Mara's fingers tightened against the fabric of her skirt. She looked at the projection again, at the inward curving streets, the centrally protected courtyards, the limited exits carefully disguised as aesthetic choice. For a flicker of breath, she imagined one of those homes with walls pushed back, a corridor extended, a door left open without correction. The image felt drafty, unmoored. Her stomach hollowed briefly as she stepped too close to a ledge. Then Lily continued speaking, voice even, measured, precise. "These spaces encourage cohesion," she explained. "They reduce unnecessary exposure. Families stay connected." The room responded with thoughtful nods. Mara's breath steadied. The draft receded. Exposure became inefficiency in her mind. Daniel's sprawling backyard, the children running in uneven arcs, the open sliding glass door. Spilling. She pressed her back fully against the wide conference chair, and let the praise wash over her. Intuitive harmony, stability lasts. The glass walls behind the audience reflected the city, towers reaching upwards, windows flung open, balconies exposed to wind. Mara found herself imagining them folded inward instead. The thought did not frighten her, it soothed her. When the applause came, it was contained and professional, hands meeting hands in measured rhythm. Lily smiled, not triumphant, not defiant, certain. And the vastness of the conference room felt, for a moment, almost manageable. Mara stepped back onto the sidewalk as the light thinned toward evening. The air felt the cool mineral scent of damp concrete and leaves beginning to soften against the curb. Porch lights flickered on in patient succession, each one a muted amber, contained within deep-set glass. No glare reached the street. Illumination remained interior. The houses appeared closer together now, not crowded, convergent. Each facade angled almost imperceptibly toward the next, as if the street itself had been drawn inward by slow degrees. A breeze entered the main road and altered. It did not move cleanly through the development. It slowed at corners, curved along recessed door frames, thinned and quieted before it could reach the far end of the curve. Sound behaved the same way. A child laughed somewhere, a bright, unfiltered burst, then the window closed and the sound flattened, absorbed into insulation and layered drywall. The street did not echo. Beyond the last row of homes, the city remained visible, towers stretching upward without constraint, highways cutting long straight lines toward the horizon. Traffic noise hovered faintly there, stretched thin by distance. Here the roads bent. Sidewalks did not run direct. Even shadows fell inward, interrupted by the soft curve of the facades. Mara turned slowly. The entrance to the neighborhood seemed farther away than it had been an hour earlier. The curve obscured it more completely now. The visual path to the outside world dissolved after a certain point, interrupted by repetition. Window, roofline, stone, porch, window. It was not a barrier, it was rhythm. From above, the development would not resemble a grid. It would resemble something closed over itself. Not tightly, carefully. Porch lights glowed in near unison now. Curtains shifted faintly behind glass, then stilled. Movement remained interior, silhouettes passing through rooms that offered no long sight lines beyond their walls. A man stepped onto his porch, stood still, and looked forward, the road beyond the curve. His posture suggested consideration. After a moment, he turned back inside. The door closed with a padded click. The sound did not travel. Mara felt the sensation again, that low, familiar pressure beneath her sternum, the one she had once named warmth, the one she once mistaken for comfort. The houses did not move. They did not need to. The distances between them had been measured correctly. Air circulated in contained loops. Light entered without invitation to leave. Over time, fewer residents felt the impulse to cross the bend at the end of the street. Not because they were restricted, because beyond it, proportions no longer felt calibrated. Open space registered as imbalance. Straight lines felt abrupt. Ceilings elsewhere seemed too high to hold sound. Inside the development, everything aligned. Movement slowed naturally. Voices softened. Doors opened inward and closed without draft. The neighborhood did not grow darker as night fell. It consolidated. From the road beyond, the houses appeared quiet, still. But the geometry no longer read as passive. It read as settled, as if the space itself had reached a point of equilibrium and no longer needed adjustment. Mara grew older in the original house. The threads never came down, they multiplied. The early labels, apologies, confessions, soft admissions of fear, yellowed and thinned with time. Their edges curled inward as though even paper preferred enclosure. In their place came new words, shorter, cleaner, not apologies now, affirmations. Close, safe, here. They hung from banisters, from lamp chains, from the interior edge of the front door, where no one would see them unless the door was fully shut. The air inside the house felt denser with each passing year, not warmer, denser. Sound no longer traveled freely from room to room. The refrigerator's hum seemed to dissolve before reaching the hallway. Footprints softened before they echoed. Even silence felt structured. Mara moved through the house more quickly than she once had. The hallway had not narrowed. She knew it had not. But she reached the living room sooner than memory predicted, as though the space between points had reduced itself through repetition. She stood sometimes in the center of the room and listened. Not for ghosts, for balance. The walls felt finished. Outside, Lily's developments spread. Each new neighborhood felt less like a project and more like a continuation. Another enclosed cluster, shaped by the same inward logic. Lily described them as communities. Mara thought of them as extensions. She visited often, walked the curved sidewalks, stepped through foyers that redirected entry through soft turns, toured model homes whose corridors brushed gently against her shoulders. The houses were beautiful, intimate, and there were more of them every year. They multiplied across the city like careful offspring, each bearing the same proportions, the same recessed windows, the same inward-bending streets. They were Lily's children, born of graphite and calculation, raised in soil and zoning approval. Mara felt it when she stood among them, that subtle familial resemblance, the way one development mirrored another, the way a courtyard in one city felt identical to a courtyard thousands of miles away. Each house gathered light the same way. Each door opened inward. Each hallway discouraged haste. Families moved into them and adjusted quickly. Voices lowered, steps slowed. Dinner tables remained occupied long after plates were cleared. Children lingered near stairwells and hearths rather than thresholds. Residents described the homes as nurturing, as protective, as though the walls understood something about proximity that open households did not. Mara told a neighbor once, smiling over the fence, "My daughter builds homes that keep families together." She believed she had done better than her mother. She had been gentler, softer, more intentional. She had replaced fear with design. She had refined love into something that did not tremble. In the original house, the labels no longer felt sentimental. They felt instructional. She traced the word "here" with her fingertip one evening and noticed it did not invoke memory anymore. It evoked orientation. Elsewhere, Lily stood in a newly completed development at dusk. The porch lights came on in staggered sequence, each glow contained behind deep-set glass. From the street, the houses leaned inward in repeating arcs. From above, from high enough to dissolve street names and property lines, the clusters resembled tightening muscles beneath skin. Across states, across countries, similar arcs appeared. Unrelated architects adjusted hallway widths by fractions, lowered ceilings by centimeters, curved streets slightly inward to soften traffic flow. The proportions felt right. They resolved tensions. Open plazas elsewhere began to feel exposed, atriums too high to regulate sound, corridors too long to contain movement. People preferred narrower transitions, interior courtyards, limited egress framed as efficiency. The market responded. From orbit, from a vantage point where cities became textures, the pattern grew more visible. Clusters of inward bending streets multiplied like cells dividing. Their curves echoed one another across continents. Expansion faltered in small, consistent corrections. The surface of the planet did not shrink. It recalibrated, like fabric drawn tighter across a frame. Back in the original house, Mara stood at the threshold one evening. The horizon beyond the door felt vast, unstructured. Too much sky. She stepped back inside, closed the door. The latch settled with a quiet, precise click. The air thickened gently around her. Not warm, aligned. Somewhere beyond the curve of Lily streets, beyond the multiplying neighborhoods, beyond the measured corridors and recessed windows, something vast, adjusted by a degree too small to detect. A correction. The developments glowed below, like constellations arranged in careful symmetry. Not random, not accidental. And the houses, Lily's houses, continued to multiply, each one born into proportion, each one teaching those inside it how to prefer enclosure, replication. And the quiet certainty that open space was an error, slowly being resolved.